So over the past few days, I've been spending a lot of time leveling up and playing as my barbarian, looking for a couple of uniques that I really wanted to try and make some builds around, and I haven't found them yet. But what I ended up using slash building in the meantime while I was hunting for the uniques I wanted ended up being really solid, and I actually really liked what it kind of turned into. So today I'm going to show you the early slash build concept for the double swing Thorn-Zerker. So before I dive into talking about how all of this works, what the build does, all the gear, skills, and on and so forth, I'm going to do just a minute or so of running around, playing, fighting some mobs as this build, just showing you a little gameplay so you can get an idea of what it looks like to play this, so you know if it's something that you would be interested in trying at all. And then after that, I'll get into going through all the details of gear, skills, etc., etc. So I will shut up, show you a little gameplay, and then I'll meet you back after that, and we'll get into the details. So that's been a little gameplay. As you can see, we don't get like astronomical damage numbers, but it's a very fast, consistent damage output. It has a lot of mobility, a lot of control, and we have a almost 100% uptime on Berserk, and it is 100% if you manage your skills well. I still have to get comfortable with the rotation a little bit better to fully optimize it. But in theory, you can have 100% uptime on Berserk. You move really fast all the time. You hit fairly hard. You're pretty darn tanky, considering how often you have to just dive bomb into the middle of a whole mob and start chopping away. I think a little extra tankiness is definitely a good thing. But I've been having a lot of fun playing this build, so if that gameplay looked like fun to you or something that you might want to also try out, see how far you can take it, stick around, because I'm going to go into the skills and all the other fun stuff of what I have going with this build right now. So first, let's go look at the basics and just look at the skill tree. And we will just go from top to bottom on here. So we use Frenzy, obviously, because we want really fast attacks. I have it scaled for reasonable damage, but we still only use 1 point in it. We take the middle node, grants bonus attack speed, also generates 2 additional fury, so this does help us with our fury generation, which I don't know if you could tell from the gameplay, but I really don't have any fury issues. Very rarely sit there not having a resource to spend. So the build is very good at generating that. And then I toggled back and forth trying a little bit between Battle Frenzy and Combat Frenzy for the final node here. Battle Frenzy is a stacking speed buff which extends to other skills. And Combat Frenzy is you gain 8% damage reduction for each stack of Frenzy, which you can have up to 3 stacks. And I've kind of settled in on using the Combat Frenzy. At first I was using Battle because I wanted the extra attack speed to extend to the double swing, but after just getting a little attack speed through skills and whatnot, it felt comfortable enough to not really use it, and I loved the extra damage reduction from Combat Frenzy, and this just plays very well into our very fast switching between the basic attack to build stacks for the damage reduction, for the speed, and getting a resource generation, and then toggling into the other skills, and then just kind of going back and forth very quickly. So I ended up on Combat Frenzy, and it seems to be working very well. And then we come down to Double Swing. I would have never guessed that this would end up being the skill I used, because especially at low level, this skill has such low damage scaling. As you can see, at +8, so rank 8 out of 5, it only has a 61% damage scaling, which is so low. In fact, I think this is just about the lowest of any of the skills. So Whirlwind does have lower, but obviously attacks very quickly. Hammer of the Ancients starts at 50, and I imagine goes way up from there. Upheaval starts at 70. Rend starts at 12, but with 96% of it being bleeding. So this is a very, very low damage scaling skill. So I really didn't like the look of it, and it doesn't have a huge AoE or anything. It's literally just you swing both weapons out in front of you for not a lot of damage, though it does have a little lower fury cost, which is nice. But yeah, I never would have guessed this would be a skill that I could really do something with. But then you come into its extra nodes. If Double Swing damages a stunned or knocked down enemy, gain 25 fury. We don't have a ton of ways to stun or anything in here. I haven't over-invested in trying to make this possible, but playing in a group, this can happen a lot because a lot of other characters and builds do stun a lot. So this is just a nice little thing that can happen once in a while. But the final node is where my build really started to hit the ground running, so to speak. So you have two options. Violent Double Swing, hitting an enemy with both hits of Double Swing, which would be the center directly in front of you, makes them vulnerable for 1 second, which vulnerable enemies take 20% increased damage. I initially started using this, and then just kind of shifted away from it as I have other ways to guarantee vulnerable we'll talk about in a minute. But this one right here, Furious Double Swing. Casting Double Swing while berserking grants 2 additional seconds of berserking. And in case you don't know what berserking is, base level grants 25% increased damage and 15% increased movement speed, lasting up to 5 seconds, and it's usually shorter. We'll get to that in a minute. But this basically lets us infinitely have berserking up, because with how fast we resource generate from Frenzy and from some of the shouts, you basically just rotate between the autos and Double Swing and autos and your other skills, and you indefinitely have berserking, which makes it another good way you can add damage into this, as berserking is just another scenario that adds damage into your attacks, which gives you something else to build off of in Paragon and skills and substats from gear and whatnot. So having 100% uptime of that is very solid. And then coming down into here, we take Rallying Cry for extra resource generation, just for big pop of resource, get us up to 100, and then start spamming Double Swing. We also have it granting Unstoppable from the first node on it, and then obviously the resource generation at the end. So that's a really useful one. You basically just start combat with that, get your resource, get your Unstoppable, start slapping things. And then in here is another little aspect and where the Thorn-Zerker part comes in. So I don't know what I was thinking initially, but I ended up taking both the Outburst and Tough as Nails, which gain thorns, gain extra thorns per set amount of max life, and then increase your thorns by 1%, enemies take 10% of Thorns' bleeding. I think this is why I took it, was to have more sources of bleeding to proc slow on enemies because of another passive coming up soon. I don't think I actually went into this thinking of using Thorns, but it ended up working so well that I just kind of kept it and built a little bit more into it. And this is something that I want to work further on with the Thorns aspect of this build. So it has a decent amount right now. I don't know if you had noticed it, but a lot of little enemies will just hit me and die. So Thorns is pretty solid, but I want to take it to the next level eventually and have the Thorns damage be doing a whole lot more. But for right now, it's kind of just a side damage aspect and another way to proc bleeding on enemies. And then down here, we take Warcry for extra damage and for a guaranteed 4 seconds of berserking. And then up here, I went back and forth, I believe early on, so if you are going to try this build, you may want to take Mighty Warcry for the Fortify instead of the Power Warcry for the extra 10% damage. But I have a consistent source of Fortify due to a legendary, so I don't need this node anymore. That's why I've moved into the extra damage. Then we fill up all of the shouts because they're all very good. Increase the duration. Enemies deal less damage for 5 seconds when they've been shouted at. And shouts heal you for 3% of max life per second. Then we come down here. 9% damage reduction while berserking. Obviously that's solid, and when you have almost 100% uptime, you almost always have that 9%, so that's a really solid one. I ended up skipping the Battle Fervor. When brawling skill damages at least one enemy, gain berserking. I have enough ways to gain berserking, and I'm not even using a brawling skill that hits enemies at all, so this is useless. We don't waste points on it. We do take a couple points in the Fury Generation while berserking. I probably could drop these because of how much I use the auto attack, the Frenzy, but for now I've just kind of left them in. And this isn't a completely optimized build. I'm still working on this actively, so don't consider this a full end game guide or anything. This is just kind of a build concept and where I have it at the moment. So then down here, I've taken the damage increase to close. I basically don't deal damage to anything that's not close. I'm always right on top of the enemy, so this is a very good passive to take. You also gain damage reduction from distant, always nice to have. Then we take No Mercy, 9% increased crit strike chance against immobilized, stunned, or slowed. Slowed is the keyword here because of this. We take Hamstring, bleeding effects slow enemies by 10%. If you're familiar with barb, you probably know where I'm going to go with this. But before we continue down the tree, I'll show you why this matters. The bleeding effects slow enemies. If you take the two-handed sword expertise, 20% of direct damage you deal is inflicted as bleeding damage over 5 seconds. So essentially, any damage I do ever now applies a bleeding. When you have this passive, your bleeding always slows, which means they always have a crowd control effect on them. Therefore, things like this, where they add or slowed enemies, you always get that bonus because you always bleed everything. So it's a wonderful little interaction that just works fantastic for this build and many other builds. So then we use Steel Grasp. I can't say that I've seen almost anybody using this skill, and I can understand preferring to have mobility or using another shout. I did play with the idea of using the challenging shout for the thorns and max health boost and the damage reduction on enemies, and it is really solid. I think you could probably use this instead of Steel Grasp, and it would be still really good, and who knows, maybe even better. But I love the pull, being able to just reach out, pull all the enemies right to you, do that big pixel pull, and then just slap everything with the double swing repeatedly because it doesn't cost much resource. And for me, that's been working out great, and I love the playstyle of it. This might not be optimal, but it's been wonderful for me. And Steel Grasp also makes enemies vulnerable for 2.5 seconds. So here's my guaranteed source of vulnerable. 20% more damage. So great damage increase. Very useful. And the last one, if Steel Grasp damages an enemy, gain berserking. So here's another way to initiate Berserk if you haven't gotten it from using like the shout. So if your shout's on cooldown, you ran out of Berserk, here's another way to proc Berserk so that you can start using double swing to keep it going indefinitely. Not to mention, the extra charge really isn't a big deal. It really doesn't have a bad cooldown at 10 seconds, so I very rarely am just sitting there without uses of it when I really need it. So I did not find any use for the extra charge. I decided the Berserking proc would be much nicer. Then we take 1 point in Thick Skin, which is each time you take direct damage, gain 0.4 of base life as Fortify. I was using this for a while when I was kind of thinking the building into the thorns and HP and just stacking this and only using this for how I build Fortify. And it kind of worked, but you have to get hit so many times even at level 3 before you just have a full bar of Fortify. And the way I figured to make Fortify is a lot more effective than this, so I dumped that and only have the 1 point to reach these, which is 1 point in counteroffensive while you have Fortify. For over 50% of max life, you deal 4% increased damage. And then right now, I have 3 points into the increased damage reduction gained while you were fortified by an additional 6%. You could move points around and fill this one up. The counteroffensive is really good. This build almost always has max fortify, so I could get a little extra damage coming in here and dropping something else. In fact, I could probably drop the extra generation there, dump a little extra here. You can move things around. I've been moving things around and trying a whole bunch of stuff, but these two are definitely really good for what we do here. And then down here, I took all 3 points into Duelist because I wanted as much attack speed as I could get, because I wanted to move around at the speed of sound and I wanted to attack as fast as I possibly could because I find that fun. And then we take Wrath of the Berserker because we're building into Berserker. Gain 20% increased movement speed and Fury generation, and while Berserker is active, every 50 Fury you spend increases the damage bonus by 25%. So as you can see, this can actually stack up pretty high because you auto attack really fast, build your resource generation because of all this very quickly, and you just kit dump it as fast as you can with double swing, and you build more damage doing it. So it can actually really rack up on bosses. I've had some very fast dungeon boss kills with this part of it going on, and it's quite fantastic. And then for our key passives, we obviously take Unconstrained. Increase Berserk's maximum duration to 5 seconds, and increase its damage bonus by 25%. So now our damage bonus while berserking is up to a 50% damage bonus, which again, we have up basically 100% of the time. So that is very, very solid, and overall seems to have created a very fast, very quick, pretty good damaging build that also manages to stay fairly tanky. So, gear is a rougher one. I don't have what I would consider optimized gear. I just have what I've been using for a while, and it works, but I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement. So if you are going to try and do something similar to me with this build, I would not look up the gear I'm using and directly copy it, because some of this isn't perfect. But we'll start with the aspects, as that will be the most important, and then we'll talk about a few of the substats that I'm looking for. So this one, the basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 2 to 6 seconds. Obviously you want that as high a number as you can get, because you want it to last a while. That is nutty. With how much you switch between the Frenzy for, your auto attacks or basics, and between double swing and just doing all the other stuff, you so often have this 20% damage reduction up that it's huge. It's such a good one. And then we have the gain 0.35% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this one. You hit things, it stacks your armor stat. Armor's really good for every character ever, so this is a great aspect. And then this one is how I was doing a lot of my Thorns damage. Thorns damage dealt has a 20% up to 40 chance to deal damage to all enemies around you. So I think this might have been why I tried building some Thorns, is I really wanted to see how this item worked, or how this aspect worked, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. So you might not have seen it proccing if you didn't know what you were looking for, but what it will do is an area, I want to say roughly like this, I'll kind of try and draw it out, pretty much like this, oops, or we'll just take off running. Almost like an auto attack, maybe slightly faster, farther than an auto attack distance. It will have these like red slash lines go on each of the enemies, and it is fairly subtle, but it'll proc, and you'll see a bunch of little red slashes on each of the enemies, and just everything in a reasonable distance around you will end up taking the same thorns damage. So, when you have a higher chance of this, and you get jumped by, say, those giant packs of spiders I was in, they're going to take a lot of damage really fast, because you're going to get a lot of procs of this, and they're just going to machine gun down their life by little thorns ticks from this exploding on them. And this has been really cool. I want to, once I get a better pair of gloves, I'm going to put a higher aspect chance on there and see if it makes a big difference when I jump into mobs. But even just with the 20% chance, I see it proc all the time. Without a ton of investment into thorns, it does a pretty good damage and more chances to proc the slow from bleeding and whatnot. So this one is great. I really have been enjoying it. And then here we have gain 3.6 damage reduction for each nearby bleeding enemy up to 18, and the range of this is 2 to 4% at a time, up to 10 to 20% maximum. That's a pretty good chunk of damage reduction, especially when combined with all the other types of damage reduction, as you can see on the pants here, which I've been having a hard time replacing. I have a lot of different damage reduction built into this piece, and through the auto attacks from Frenzy and from the basic skills grant damage reduction, so it's a lot of different damage reductions, and this just plays even more into that, since anything that hits me bleeds. Bleeding gives me damage reduction, yada yada. You can tell where it goes from there. And then this one is just kind of a placeholder. I'm not sure what I want to use for the boots for now, but while unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, gain 10% up to 25% increased movement speed, and can move freely through enemies. That is pretty nice. I'm still keeping my eye out to see if there's anything I'd like more, but you do get unstoppable both from Rallying Cry and from Wrath of the Berserkers, so you do actually get a pretty good benefit from this aspect, but I'm still keeping my eye out for something better. And then into the weapon ones. So here I have on a two-handed weapon, so it gets an increased effect. Gain 3,362 thorns while berserking, which 100% uptime on berserking means a lot of thorns, and this is a very low roll on this. I could get one much better, I just have not found one yet, but I would love to get this aspect at a much higher level. And then here, casting double swing twice within 2 seconds creates a Dust Devil that deals 689. Again, this is the lowest possible roll, could be improved a lot. Damage to enemies behind the target. It's not a big deal, there might be a more optimized use of this, but I like adding the little extra AoE to the attack since I don't have much in the way of reach. And then here's another important one, basic skills gain 29 or 28, a 15 to 30 roll, basic skill attack speed. So make your frenzy even faster is pretty much what this does, and it works good. I really like it. I haven't committed to putting it on the amulet or two-handed weapons because there was more damage sources I thought were more important. Because even though the frenzy is pretty useful and does reasonable damage, I didn't want to just full double down into using frenzy because I really wasn't sure how its damage would be later on. But just for convenience of building your fury, I really like having the extra attack speed, especially because I did get a pretty good roll on that. And then my other two-hander, whenever you deal direct damage while berserking, inflict 40%, 40 up to 60, of base damage dealt as additional bleeding damage over 5 seconds. So again, we're always berserking, as I've said 100 times. This is a lot more bleeding damage, stacked on top of all the other bleeding damages to enemies while you're berserking, so just even more damage to stack in there. And then into the jewelry. These ones are pretty straightforward that I've seen most barbarians use. When you cast shouts, its cooldown is reduced by 1.8, 1 second up to 1.9 seconds, per nearby enemy up to a maximum of 6 seconds, so Your shouts have extra cooldown if you use them around a lot of enemies. Pretty straightforward, really nice. Your shout skills generate 2 to 4 fury per second while active. Another really nice way to keep that fury generation up so you can just spam your skills all day long. And then the last aspect currently, and the reason that I have not taken almost any Fortify throughout the whole skill tree, each point of fury generated while at maximum fury grants 15, 10 up to 21, Fortify. So with how fast we use the frenzy auto attacks, how often we do it, you hit your max resource, you keep swinging for a couple seconds, and bam, you're at max Fortify. And with how often you rotate back to using the frenzy auto attacks, you just never run out of Fortify. It's basically always capped because of this one aspect, which let me dump some of those other skills or other points in the abilities so that I could use them elsewhere. So this one is fantastic. I'm still looking for one that might be a little higher rolled or just a better amulet in general. But yeah, that does it for all of the aspects I'm currently using. And again, I don't think these are mega uber optimized or anything like that. This is just what I found, and they've been a lot of fun. I will talk about a few of the substats that I'm looking for, just in case some of you want to try this build. So, basic skill damage and core skill damage are something I'm looking for on every piece when I can, just because that directly increases my damage. From there, damage to crowd controlled is good. I'm pretty sure slow is a crowd control, so you get that damage bonus. Critical strike damage is pretty good. I have been looking for a lot of crit rate, so crit strike damage is pretty solid. Obviously, you use the critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemy gems, so you stack a lot of crit damage. We attack so fast with this build that you crit pretty often. Stacking strength is pretty useful as well. Damage to bleeding is also very good. Damage to close is pretty solid. Obviously, almost everything we attack is very close to us. I would prefer the other damage sources, slowed, core, basic skill damage, and whatnot. But damage to close is just fine. I think you almost always count as hitting from close, so that's another good one. And then in the armor, I'm obviously looking for berserk duration on the boots, and I think it's helmet. I'm not sure where else I got it. I know there's another piece that can get that, but then you're looking for things like damage reduction from distant, damage reduction while fortified, basically any of the different damage reductions. As you can see here, I have both damage reduction while fortified, flat damage reduction, while bleeding damage reduction, and health, so this one is nutty with a lot of different reductions. Then we obviously want plus ranks to double swing just to try and get as much scaling as possible since it has such low damage scaling. We want the crit strike chance when possible. We want to get some thorn stacks if we can. I have mine on the chest piece and on the amulet, and I think I might have one thorns roll somewhere else in here, but either way. And then basic skill speed, cooldown reduction, damage while berserking. There's really a whole lot of different effects that are really solid. Total armor is another good one. Physical damage. There's really just there's so many different things that can build into what this setup is doing that there's very few just absolutely bad stats you can get. Obviously, I've kind of picked some of the ones I want the most of, but there's really a lot of good ones and a lot of ways you could set this up. But that kind of does it for all of the gear and the stats I'm looking for. I will quickly show you what I've done in the Paragon, just as the main nodes, just so you can see. So we take the physical damage here. I have the Wrath socket for every 5 dexterity within range. Core skills do 3% increased critical strike damage, which isn't a very high level yet. And skills that critically strike generate 3 fury. This can help me get a lot more spamming of the double swing, especially when I'm in a thick mob. You'd be surprised how often it crits and how often you get all the resource back. We come up through here for more physical damage. And then I took the Blood Rage node tree thing. We swing up through here on the right. We get the damage while berserking, 100% uptime, and the duration helps. And so that basically just means that we get a lot more damage all the time, more duration. Over here, Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking. This can be really, really nice, especially when fighting a lot of mobs very quickly and just zooming around and speed clearing. Having this, I could probably skip using the Steel Grasp, the chains that grant me berserking for 2 seconds, but I like to keep that on, at least for now, just due to the fact that during bosses, obviously you may not be killing a lot of things, which makes it a little bit harder to keep the berserk up. Between the ult and Warcry, you probably could fairly easily, since it grants 2 seconds of berserking per use. So I could probably drop the Steel Grasp, but I still like using it on top of it, so I just also guarantee that I have the berserk 100%. I came up here, damage to bleeding, a whole other stat you can stack on, because with the barb setup you're almost always making everything bleed, so you just get even more. You came over here, damage while berserking. I took the Ire Glyph. For every 5 strength purchased within range, deal 2.7% increased damage while berserking. That's a fun one you can stack to the moon. While berserking, you take 10% reduced damage from elites. Another way to add a little more tankiness. And I probably could skip it, but I did come down from here and took the damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding, simply because I like damage reduction. I like not dying, and with how often we jump into the center of a big pack of enemies, as much damage reduction as you can get is fantastic. Then you come all the way up into here, damage while bleeding, damage to elites, fantastic, some extra damage to elites and bleeding down here. And then this one I haven't really gotten far into, but on the third tree here, I came down, took damage while berserking, damage to elites, don't quite have the bonus filled out yet. And then I'm coming up here to Carnage. While berserking, critical strikes increase your attack speed by 2% up to 8% for 6 seconds. I just figured nothing in the different legendary nodes fits what I'm doing in this build better than this. I crit a lot, I like attacking fast, why not keep stacking that attack speed? So from here, I'll be coming over and probably taking the damage while berserking, and then I'm not sure exactly what glyph slot I'm going to use here. I'm probably going to use the Undaunted. For every 5 willpower, you deal 4.1 increased damage while fortified. I have this one at level 8 right now. You gain up to 10% damage reduction the more fortify you have. Again, I have fortify a ton, so I figured if I can get enough willpower and range, I think this would be a really good one to round out the build with for some more damage and reductions. Oof, so that was a lot to go over. A few changes I'm really hoping to be able to make is one of the uniques I've been searching desperately for is the Razor Plate chest piece, which would give me an absurd amount of thorns. I think that would be a nice way to increase a lot of that thorn tick damage while jumping into big mobs. So that's something that for me would kind of be a best in slot. I think I'd have to get it and try it out, but that's one I'm looking for. There's also a weapon I'm curious about trying, the one-handed. I can't remember what it's called right now, but there's a few things that I'm still looking to improve upon and keep trying. So again, this is kind of a here's where I'm at and a build concept, not a end game build guide. But I think this build is a lot of fun. I definitely think if you're looking for something to play as a barb and you really don't want to play Hammer of the Ancients or Whirlwind like everybody else, I think this is worth trying. I don't think this is a good PvP build. Most of our damage reduction, or at least a lot of it, relies on like building up the stacks from auto attacks, situational things like getting bleeds on them and stuff, and so I just don't see this as a very solid PvP build. I could be proven wrong. I've tried to battle a little bit. I'm not much of a PvPer, but it did not seem to go very well, so I definitely wouldn't claim it's for PvP. I think it's more for just sprinting around, fighting PvE content, and just blasting things, channeling your inner berserker and moving as fast as you can, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. So I would be curious to hear what you guys think. Maybe there's something I'm missing that could really improve this, or a legendary aspect you think I should really be using that would make this any better. I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think and get some more brains thinking on this, because I've been having a lot of fun, and I really do think this build could be something. I've cleared up to a T25 Nightmare Dungeon without too much trouble, and I did that while I was, I want to say, like level 67? So I was a little over 10 levels under leveled as well. And it handled it pretty well. It was a bit sketchy here and there jumping into mobs, but I managed it. And I think with some more growth and gear, this build could do some pretty cool stuff. So again, let me know what you guys think down below. I'm really curious to see if you guys have any recommendations that I haven't thought of yet. I'd really like to try and make this build do something great. So anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my concept of the double swing Thorn-Zerker. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.